The deep, dark water can hold so many secrets, myths, and tall tales. Does the water play tricks on the mind when you've been out to sea too long? Or when you've gazed at its glassy surface and lost track of time? It is said we know more about outer space than we do about our own oceans. So I guess you'll have to judge for yourselves. Enjoy. On a 41-foot sailboat in the middle of the Chesapeake Bay, with about 7 other men doing a test cruise, planned to be out for about 12 hours. Mid-1980s, not as reliable weather prediction resources. We get caught in a tropical storm, winds gusting into the 50-mile-per-hour range, just this short of a weak hurricane. We had just barely rigged storm hawsers and storm sails because the one fellow on board who was the best sailor sensed the storm was almost on us. Otherwise, we would have died. During the storm itself, I expected to die at any time. In fact, we even made securite calls on the radio. If you have any time at sea, you know what I'm talking about. If not, it's not that important. For what seemed like 15 minutes, we were in a maelstrom, no visibility. But then it passed. We would live. This was at 3 p.m. And although there was cloud cover, of course, the ambient light was such so that you could see 2 miles or so in any direction. At this point, we're all on deck, working lines, checking damage, etc. And the bay around us is choppy and churning and foaming. Old-timey sailors often use the saying, "the sea is confused." I look about 15 feet of the starboard side and something swims to the surface, breaks the surface, looks at us, then submerges again. And it was like a thin man, with humanoid shapes, arms articulated like a man, a human head, but its skin was covered in scales like a snake. It looked at us, blinked its weird heavy-lidded eyes, then dove back under. So maybe you need to know a few things about me at that moment. No drugs, no alcohol, no injuries. I was elated because I was glad to be alive, but my senses in that situation were sharpened, not dulled. I had at the time about 6 years' experience on ships and fishing boats. I had seen squid, octopi, flying fish, sharks, skates, etc., all around the world. I was not the type of guy to see a patch of seaweed and call it a sea monster. I made an instant decision that I was not going to say anything. What could I say anyway? I just saw a strange creature, take my word for it. The men on this boat were all mechanics and engineers and professionals. Why get a reputation as a flake? At the time, it was important for each of us to get a D skipper or OOD qualifications, and saying something like that would be frowned upon. As I stood there with my life vest, soaking wet, hooked onto the steel lifeline, glad to be alive, one of the other sailors, a USN captain with over 30 years' experience, piped up and said, "I just saw a brown thing pop up on the surface. It looked like a lizard man with a scaly face. It blinked at us with big eyes, then went back under." "Yeah, I saw it too," I said. No one else had said that they had seen it. Then we sailed back to the pier later that day and never spoke of it again. I live by a dam on the Mississippi River in Iowa. The divers that have to go down and check the concrete always only go down once. After that, they're done. They just nope the fuck out. One guy I know did 2 tours in Iraq. He said it was nothing like that. Just freely swimming along, and all of a sudden, 3-foot mouth of a catfish just sitting there, waiting for something to swim by and into its hellhole. The water is always so murky that you can't see from end to end of it. I remember when I was a kid, you could snag for carp down there. My dad hit a 7-foot catfish that weighed in around 85 pounds. But we couldn't keep them, so we just threw them back. Grandfather said similar things. He worked at a power plant right along the river, and they had divers who would routinely need to go under and patch things up for the plant under the water. Said majority of the men went down once, and never again after seeing the size of some of the catfish below, which they claimed could probably eat them. One of my art teachers in high school was also a diver, and often did dives in one of the lakes in Arkansas. He regaled us with tales of catfish the size of small cars. I worked on a cruise ship for about 7 months as a youth staff, taking care of kids while the parents partied it up. At certain parts of the day, we closed the playroom to the older kids and just let parents with their children that are under 2 come in. This woman comes to the gate with a double stroller, with 2 of the ugliest looking babies I have ever seen in my life. She asks if she can come in with her babies. Of course I oblige, but something seems a bit off. She takes the babies out of the stroller and puts them on the blanket. We have toys placed upon the middle of the room. It is then that I realized what was so strange about these babies. They were dolls. This woman was taking pictures of them with the toys and pretending they were alive, names and all. I looked over at my coworker, and she's giving me the same look of shock and horror that I have in my own face. We have no clue what to do or say. News spreads quickly to the other crew members on the ship about her. Apparently, she bought gold bracelets for them at the jewelry shop on board. That woman is by far the most amazing and strangest thing I have ever witnessed at sea. I do a lot of offshore fishing in the South Atlantic. Some cool and crazy things I've seen while boating. I got caught once in the annual migration of spinner sharks. Went right through a school that I would guess would be about 10,000 or more sharks that just happened to be working on a very large bait school. You could count no less than 10 sharks breaching the surface about every second. It was one of the scariest experiences, yet one of the most amazing sights I've ever seen, and there I ended up right in the middle of the madness. I literally had one shark land in the bow of the boat, and another break the cowling on the outboard, while several others bounced off the sides. One time I almost hit a dead body when returning from a trip at the end of the day. It was just turning dusk, and I was coming in from about 15 miles offshore after a day of fishing. I was cruising around 25 knots when out of the corner of my eye, I spotted something bright yellow just off the port side of the boat and almost made impact with it. I slowed down and turned the boat around in an attempt to find whatever it was I almost hit, but was unsuccessful, and it was getting late, and the sun was almost down, so I decided it would be best to just head back in. The next day, a body in yellow waders washed up on shore about 25 miles to the north. I can't say for sure if it was the same yellow object I almost hit, but I'd be willing to bet it was. Another time I encountered a great white while surfacing from a dive in about 75 feet of water, which was extremely unusual because great whites shouldn't be anywhere around the area of the Atlantic where I fish. This was confirmed a few days later by multiple other boats that spotted the same shark and eventually made the news. Another time I saw an otter dragging a leatherback sea turtle to shore that had somehow managed to kill. I was fishing in a 17-foot Mohawk canoe off the main bridge in Titusville, Florida. It's teeming with fish in that area. I have a trolling motor on the side of the canoe, and I hover my spot down the south shore. Over to my left, just as I arrive at the south end of the trough, I see a pod of manatee in the water about 75 yards away. I have a little camera stowed away and I decide to get some up-close pics for the kids. I turn west in the middle of the lagoon area and head over shallow water and grass beds with my trolling motor turned to 5 top speed. I notice it appears very shallow immediately ahead of me and cut the motor to 0. That's the last thing I remember before the loudest noise that came from all around me. Water exploded around and under my 75-pound canoe with a 150-pound me in the back. The front of my canoe went up over at a 45-degree angle, and the rear of my canoe with me in it came off the surface of the water, so much so that my battery came off the floor. In the front of my canoe, all my tackle and such was launched into the air. It's not obvious what happened to me for a minute. I was so afraid and so vulnerable and unsure if it would happen again. I reattached things back at my trolling motor. Wires had come loose, I think, and went to the shoreline, where the railroad passed, and got out and tried to piece my equipment back together and my experience. The pod of roughly 21 manatees, number from Ranger, had come into the lagoon area recently, and as it turns out, they have a similar danger signal to beavers. They slap the surface of the water. When that many do it, and it's in 2 feet of water, and they are really frightened by my entry into the area, it can almost violate the laws of bowel physics. Trust me, I know. Mom's partner is a fisherman, and a couple things came to mind. The incredible amount of great white shark encounters they have out at sea, obviously attracted by the bait or something. Stories of being circled and harassed by sharks for sometimes up to days, in at least 1 or 2 occasions, resulting in them having to go back in. Freak waves. Sadly, the amounts of fishermen killed by freak waves is too high. Imagine Mother Nature just unleashing a huge wave out of nowhere that obliterates a fishing boat, killing those on board. He's participated in many searches for bodies and those of lost fishermen at sea, including hauling numerous bodies on board and assisting police in the searches. My favorite, though, was something he actually saw on land while out at sea. On an incredibly remote and rugged part of Tasmania's west coast, the crew noticed what appeared to be a dog on the beach. As they got closer, they noticed it was sniffing around in some seaweed and walking a bit differently than a dog. As they continued to get closer, they also noticed something else. It had what appeared to be the outline of stripes along its back half. To this day, they believe they saw an extinct Tasmanian tiger. Regular sightings are still reported in Tasmania, and many local fishermen have also reported seeing them in that particular area. Well, what about you? Have you saw something swimming below the surface that made you question your own eyes? Have you felt something unseen graze your leg, just enough in the deep dark water to make you swim for the shore? I've heard some people say that when seaweed touches your foot, it's as if the devil himself is licking your foot and saying, "Moist." See you next time.